breakout sessions for the past 2 years, and a lot of the surveys that we've been getting, we've had a lot of people are interested in learning how their loved ones can support you all while you're on your journey. So anyways, that's what Melissa's going to speak about today. I really appreciate it. Good morning. Good morning. As she said, my name is Melissa. My husband Joe decided to join me this morning as well. So if you feel the need to hear from a male perspective at any time, I said, I'm going to pull you up if they need to. And he was like, no, I'm just here to look pretty. So anyway, but he, seriously, if we do get to a point where you want to hear from somebody who is male, he is very capable of getting up and speaking. As was mentioned, this is my third year talking with KCIA. The last 2 years, I was asked to talk about infertility in your faith. So I'm going to just tell you from the start that that is a part of my story. And as we kind of go through there today, I'm not here to witness to anybody, but I would be lying or leaving out a significant part of my story if from time to time I didn't mention my faith. So I just wanted to put that out there from the get-go, because sometimes I know people are like, I don't want to hear all about this, especially different parts of your journey. So I am a school counselor. I've been a school counselor for the last 8 years. Prior to that, I was a teacher for the 8 years before that. So I enjoy what I do greatly, and it's a lot of fun. So I'm going to go ahead and get started. Kind of how I've broken today out, we're going to kind of make sure we level the playing field. So for some of you who have been on this journey and are in this room, this is going to be stuff you know. But for others of you who maybe are here to support your loved one, this might be something new. So we're going to start out with talking a little bit about what is infertility. Infertility is defined as the inability to get pregnant after a year of trying with unprotected sex, or the inability to carry a pregnancy to live birth. If you are over the age of 35 and you're on this journey, the span of time shrinks to 6 months. So that is the definition of infertility. There are a couple of organizations here, the World Health Organization and the American Society for Reproductive Medicine, that consider infertility a disease. Oftentimes people just think they don't want to understand it as a disease. So we will be coming to this place today with talking about it as a disease. One of the things that I really want to point out to you is infertility is a disease that robs you of your time, robs you of your money in a lot of ways, and of your power, because you have very little control in what happens. So, just a few statistics, 7.4 million women have had some sort of treatment for infertility. That's approximately 12% of the population. About 1 in 8 couples struggle to get pregnant. So if you think about 8 of your friends, maybe one of those couples in that mix are one of those ones that are struggling to get pregnant. Approximately a third of the infertility problems a couple experiences are female related. Approximately a third of them are male related. And approximately a third of them are a combination of both, or unexplained. I think unexplained infertility would have to be one of the most maddening processes ever. So if anybody in this room has unexplained infertility, my heart goes out to you, because at least in my journey I knew why. This is shocking to me. 18 states have passed laws that require insurance to cover a portion, not all, a portion of infertility treatments. If you think about, when you're in infertility treatments, you may have 3 or 4 sonograms prior to even finding out if you get to go through with the process that month. Missouri is not one of the states that covers that. And so each one of those sonograms, each one of those blood tests, each one of everything is out of pocket if you don't have insurance. It's maddening to me that we can, as a society, we can say infertility and needing infertility treatments is a choice, and that it is elective. So you'll hear me later, if I don't remember to later, you'll hear me now say, if you're one of those people that you like to deal with law and changes and all of that, one of the best things you can do would be petition our legislator and government to include at least partial coverage, give families a break, because this is maddening to me. And you don't even see Kansas on there either. So, infertility in marriages or relationships. This is really sad. Couples who struggle with infertility are 3 times more likely to divorce. 3 times more likely to divorce. And if you get to the point to where you have gone through all the treatments and you remain childless, some of the newest research is stating that those couples are up to 10 times more likely to divorce. Now you think about the divorce rate among the United States anyway. It's high. And you add this into the mixture and it increases. To me, that's part of the reason why a breakout session like today is so important. Because infertility couples need support. We need everybody to rally around us along the way. The effect of infertility has on relationships, it's not a shock. I mean, people who have failed IVF, some of the newest research is saying people who have failed in vitro cycles are usually struggling with depression for 3 to 5 years after their in vitro cycle, failed in vitro cycle. So if your loved one has gone through in vitro and that has failed, and they are still struggling 2-4 years out, it's pretty common they're finding. Most men and women are still processing how to deal with this. And so some therapists out there are saying that a lot of these infertility couples have unresolved grief. Like society tells them to move along. If you notice at the beginning of this slideshow, I called this the silent grief. Infertility is one of those griefs that couples struggle with to the very core of them. And just because there may not be crying all the time doesn't mean that that sadness is not overwhelming to them. It permeates every part of your life. You can't go to Target without seeing a pregnant person. You can't go and be in a relationship with people without having to face what you can't seem to have. And so society doesn't talk about it. They don't know how to talk about it. And so people with infertility a lot of times just kind of sweep it under the rug, except for when they're together. And then it all comes boiling out. And I think that's part of the reasons why marriages struggle. They don't know how to deal with it. And so in that, there's a lot of unresolved grief with infertility. Women especially are prone to a low self-esteem. They're prone to depression, feeling of worthlessness, guilt, feeling like they failed. And as you know, if you've ever been in a relationship with somebody who struggles with depression for any reason, you know as in that relationship, there's a dissatisfaction that occurs because that's, especially in a marriage relationship, that spouse is powerless as how to help them. Or the family around them feels powerless of how to help them. So a lot of times unresolved grief, if it's not worked through, can be very difficult on a relationship. The relationship and the reminder of the childlessness usually causes couples to split. It's a very painful time. So why a breakout session on this topic? Honestly, the alone feelings that couples deal with when they are struggling with infertility is heartbreaking. And because, as we referenced before, couples who have infertility issues are 3 times more likely to split or to divorce, it's all the more reason we need to talk about this, and we need to talk about how to support people, because we got to rally around them in effort to protect them and to help them through it so that they make it on the other side whole. So that's one of the main reasons for this. People who have infertility, they just want to feel normal. They just want to be able to go do their business and end up with a success story. They don't want to have all of this technical medical jargon, go see this doctor, go have this embarrassing procedure, go do this and that. They just want to be normal. They just want to say, it happened, I'm pregnant, I tried, I started last month, and now I'm pregnant. Communication about fertility problems with close family members and friends is difficult. I believe wholeheartedly that every person in this room wants to be 100% supportive. I believe that. The problem comes in the support that you're trying to show may not register as support to the people you're with, and we're going to talk about that a little bit today. And I mentioned this already, a lack of support causes depression in women especially, but I don't want to leave out the men also. Men just tend to deal with it a little bit differently than women, but their loss is still just as important as a woman's loss. So, the cycle of infertility, we're going to talk about this for just a second. I put a roller coaster on there because if you've been through this, you know the emotional piece of this is like a roller coaster, and I hate roller coasters. So, it's about how much I hate this emotional side of it. Infertility is conceptualized as a major crisis in life. It is ongoing, it's recurrent, it cycles around. It's not like, for most people, it's not like you go and have one procedure and you have a success. You may have multiple procedures, you may try multiple things, you may be doing this for years, and you may end up with a success story, or you may not. So it's this recurring problem. There are 4 emotional reactions, 4 phases that people have. Now this is the counselor side of me, so forgive me. But the initial phase is this shock. Oh my gosh, this is not working for us. Or oh my gosh, we have this issue. Or whatever. The reactive phase, frustration, anger, anxiety, guilt. The adaptive phase is acceptance. And the resolution phase is planning for future solutions. These 2 phases may encompass a whole lot of years. A whole lot of years. It may take a long time before we get here. Infertility, as I mentioned, is often referred as the silent grief. It is one of those things that, you know, if I had a disease or a sickness, somebody would come up to me and say, hey, how you doing? But with infertility, a lot of times it's that taboo subject that nobody wants to broach. And so it leads to those feelings of isolation. It leads to those feelings of I'm doing this journey alone. Once a couple decides on the treatments, the pain emotionally as well as physically, especially for the females, it's tremendous. It is tremendous. And it increases all the more as procedure after procedure fails. That pain and that emotional pain especially increases, all the while your bank account is decreasing. Infertile people, if they never get to the point of having a child, they grieve the loss of that. They grieve the loss of having a child that looks like them and their spouse. They grieve the loss of the experience. They may also grieve the loss of a baby that they were pregnant with, that they had a miscarriage or a stillborn. And they grieve that loss. And when you're in the infertility realm, whether you're 6 weeks pregnant or 6 months pregnant, that loss is tremendous. And they grieve that. No matter how hard the couples try to prepare themselves for the bad news, it's not enough. I mean, every month, you still have this glimmer of hope that this month something might change, only to find out it didn't change. And then you kind of go through that whole cycle, emotional cycle again. I've said to a lot of people, man, what is it that every month that I find out I'm not pregnant, I got to deal with it at the most emotional time of the month anyway? Like, you know, like if at least if it was a different week, we could try to be a little more rational. So, a couple will eventually resolve the infertility problem in one of these 3 ways. They're either going to eventually have a baby, they will either stop infertility treatments and choose to live without children, or they will adopt or be a foster parent. That is how, one of those three ways is how a couple resolves infertility. So, my story. I'm going to take a moment to talk to you a little bit about my story because one, I think there's a little bit of credibility to why I'm able to stand up here and talk about this today. But also, just to kind of share with you a personal experience of how this happened. I like this quote because it says, a heartbreak isn't always as loud as a bomb exploding. Sometimes it can be as quiet as a feather falling, and the most painful thing is, nobody hears it except you. So my story, you can see a picture of me and my husband when we got married 16 years ago. My story doesn't start 16 years ago when I got married. My story actually starts 36 years ago when I remember the first time I wanted to be a mom. I was 5 years old. My aunt had just had a baby. She wouldn't let me hold the baby because I was too young. And I was angry and I was sad. And I went outside at my grandmother's house and I sat on the swing and I just said out loud, this is wrong. And when I have a baby someday, I'm going to allow people to hold that baby and just have this whole conversation with myself. And from that moment on, I knew I wanted to be a mom. I would do the whole let me shove a pillow up my shirt, pretend walk around that I'm pregnant. I would do the whole I think this is a girl thing, but write out what my baby names were going to be. I did all of that. I knew that I was going to be a mom someday. My mom was a stay-at-home mom. She loved us. She was a great mom. And I knew that I wanted to follow in her steps someday. I was always around kids. Always. You look at my history, I've always been around kids. My profession is with kids. I just knew what I wanted to do. There was no doubt in my mind. When I was about 8 years old, I had a defining moment that may be different than a lot of couples who struggle with infertility. I watched the movie Annie, and I was wrecked by how mean that lady was who ran the orphanage. And so at 8 years old, I decided I was going to adopt kids someday. So my plan was, I'm going to have a couple, I'm going to adopt a couple. And so on my first date with my husband, I said, so what do you think I adopt? Well, it is in the Bible. And I was like, it sure is. Good answer. You know, because I knew that was going to be a part of my story. I just didn't realize that I was going to have both a struggle with infertility as well as a desire to adopt. So this was us 16 years ago. We got married. Here's a little funny side note. It's funny now. When we were on our honeymoon, we were in Hawaii, and I woke up at 4 o'clock every morning to take my birth control pill because I was not going to get pregnant. It's funny now because 16 years later, it's funny now that I can look back and look at my journey, that I was so worried about that I would get up at 4 o'clock in the morning to make sure I was taking that pill at the same time as I took it in Kansas City. So we started 18 months after we got married, which would have been in March of 2001. We went off the pill. We decided we were going to start a family. Several months went by, nothing happened. I went to my OB/GYN at the time. She was like, you've been on the pill, it can take up to a year or two after the pill. Don't worry about it. So we kind of went through that whole thing. In October of 2002, she put me on Clomid, which is like the devil kind of medicine. We apologize. For everybody in the room that we've snapped at, that we have been snotty to, we apologize. These meds they put us on, they make us crazy. And it's kind of weird because, you can kind of say, gosh, I may not be very rational at the moment, but I sure feel irrational, so I'm going to go with that. And it makes you kind of crazy along the way. But we started Clomid. We took 6 cycles worth of Clomid, did the whole ovulation kit, kind of stuff. And at the same time, we really felt like God had asked us to start foster parenting. So a lot of our story kind of has two different lines going at the same time. And so in June of 2003, Joe and I decided to become a foster parent. We decided to go through to get our license. And in August of that same year, at this time I was a third grade teacher, I met this young man. He was in my classroom. He wasn't quite that old, obviously. But he was 9 years old, and he stole my heart. And he was in the foster care system, and kudos to my husband, who I would come home every night and I would talk about him, and he would, he finally one day said, well, maybe we should see if he could live with us as foster placement. So, long story, many conversations, many prayers, all of that later. Jordan moved in with us in December of 2003, and we got the pleasure of adopting him in March of 2004. So that was very much a blessing for us. However, we're still in this process of this infertility route as we're going, because again, our stories were going to be combined. A few months after we adopted Jordan, we got a phone call of a little girl who was just born. Her name, we'll call her Samara because that's what her name is now. But she was 2 days old when we brought her home from the hospital. And we had so much fun with her. And she is such a bundle of joy. But when she was brought home to us, we were in the middle of, like when she was 2 weeks old and we just brought her home, I had my first surgery for infertility. They had to go in and remove a cyst that I had that was about the size of a grapefruit. And so that was my first bout of surgeries. And in the meanwhile, I have this beautiful child living with me for a year, living with us. He's usually not here with me, so I kind of leave him out. Living with us, and I didn't know if I was going to get to adopt her. Because if you are familiar all with the children's division, you can have a child for a couple of years in your house, and they can go home. So I was we ended up getting to adopt her when she was 15 months old. So she is our little joy. She is getting ready to turn 11. So she's a lot of fun. She's all sass as she looks there. So in that process, was really starting to see that the infertility stuff was really continuing to be a problem for us. The surgery was unsuccessful in making me ovulate like I needed to, and we were quickly starting to realize that this was really a problem. Just because we had no insurance, we struggled to keep going to the doctor's appointments. I can tell you, going to doctor's appointments is incredibly emotional. It is incredibly emotional, because you go there and you really don't hear very good news. And you go there and you're kind of like, oh, Tiffany, maybe something's going to change, and you really don't hear good news. It's incredibly emotional. And so, as we were in this process of adopting these two, we were finding out that there was an issue on Joe's side as well as my side that was preventing us together from having a child. So we kind of put the infertility stuff on hold because we didn't have insurance to cover it. We were busy with little ones and all of that, but all the while it's still in the back of your mind. Still in the back of your mind. I do have one more little guy to mention. My husband decided we needed Jace. It's kind of we were still foster parents, and Joe decided to submit our case study, to try to get Jace, and forgot to tell me that he did that. So I get a phone call, hey, you guys have been chosen to move on to the next phase of adopting baby boy, who at the time was not Jace. And I was like, huh? So I'm calling my husband, did you fail to mention something to me? Oh, yeah, I kind of did. But we were moving at the time, so we were not even living in our house, we were living with my parents. And it ended up turning out to be a very big blessing for us. We actually got chosen as Jason's adoptive resource, and he came to live with us when he was 3 weeks old. and he is now turning 9 next week. So he's been a true bundle of joy. I tell people all the time, Samara and Jordan, they were not adopted for infertility reasons because we weren't sure what was going on at that point. If anybody was adopted because we knew we had infertility, it would have been this guy. But he is a true bundle of joy. He is, oh my word, he is my heart because he is always happy, and I need that in my world. So, in 2008, Joe's insurance changed. We had been praying that God would allow us an opportunity to move forward with having a biological child, and all of a sudden, his insurance changed. And his insurance now covered $12,500 worth of infertility treatment. And if you are one of the people in the room who has infertility issues, you know how big of a woohoo that really is because it's crazy expensive. So Joe and I went to, well, we found that out in June, but it took me till October to gear up and be ready to go talk to Dr. Starks. It took me that long to emotionally prepare myself to deal with what he was going to say. And we had had many conversations along the way about where we were going to stop. And we went to Dr. Starks, and he said, you guys have less than a 5% chance of getting pregnant on your own. You're going to need to go straight to in vitro. Nothing else is going to work. So you kind of feel sucker punched in the throat a little bit, but you look at that and you say, okay. So we decided to move forward with that option, and in January of 2009, we began the whole process of getting ready. I was hyperstemmed, which those of you in the room know that's very painful. It means your ovaries are ginormous. I had to be very careful because they could have burst very easily. We went through the process. 18 eggs were viable, which is good, but only 8 of them took. Of the 8, only 5 of those 8 grew to the quality they wanted them to be. So the first go around, they inseminated, well, they glued the embryos into us, as Dr. Starks told me. And we got pregnant. So by 2009, I had already been in this journey with Joe for 8 years of never being pregnant on my own. We were super excited. We debated how we were going to handle this, telling very few people. We did get my whole family together at my mom's house, and we presented them with this little card that had a pregnancy test that read the word pregnant and said a picture's worth 1,000 words. And we were super excited. Went to the first sonogram. Things were good. Dr. Starks told me that day when we left, he was like, expect twins. That's what he told me that day. He's like, you guys are textbook perfect. So we went home feeling pretty much on cloud 9. Sonogram went well. And then all of a sudden, those dreaded phone calls about the hormones aren't increasing quite as rapidly as we'd like them to. We're going to keep monitoring you, to finding out close to the end of my first trimester that she didn't make it. So that was so painful. I felt like life was a sick, cruel joke. And I was very upset, obviously. I was very angry, is probably the better word. Oftentimes my sadness comes out looking like anger. And man, I cannot even, I was sitting here thinking last night, telling Joe, I don't know how to articulate the level of pain I felt. Because it just sucked everything out of me. I had to have a DNC to find out, well, Dr. Starks recommended it because he wanted